Now, America has the highest amount of gun ownership in the world. Why is it that politicians want to take this away from us? The reason being is they only see the evil in firearms and never the good. I'm here to tell you why restrictions on firearms will always fail to benefit society. Crime will increase if firearms are restricted. Let's look at Australia. From 1997 to 2002, robbery and armed robbery went up 200%. From 1997 is when the gun ban was enabled. Just like Australia, the UK banned guns in 1997 after a mass shooting. Gun crime went down, but violent crime skyrocketed. The UK is said to have 2,094 violent crimes per 100,000 citizens, which is even worse than South Africa, being at 1,609 crimes per 100,000 citizens. Now the US, even though it's number one in gun ownership, has a violent crime rate of 466 per 100,000 residents. Now let's compare that. UK having 2,094 violent crimes per 100,000 citizens, and the US having 466 per 100,000 residents. Why is there such a huge difference? Well, the reason being is criminals have assurance that victims are unarmed, and they could, like, home robberies, rape, go up. Now, criminals will never listen to firearm restriction laws. Let's look at magazines. Now, politicians like to ban high-capacity magazines. Why is that? The reason being is they say it's to prevent more deaths in mass shootings. But let's say they have 10-round magazines, they have to reload, and a citizen can tackle them. What's the problem in that? The problem is that criminals won't listen to these laws. Let's look at some popular mass shootings. Sandy Hook, Aurora, and Columbine. All of those mass shootings had high-capacity magazines that were owned illegally. Now, let's look at gun-free zones. What's the point of gun-free zones? It's to prevent violent crime from happening in them. But what's the flaws in them? Well, gun-free zones, a concealed carrier could walk up to a gun-free zone and look, a sign would be displayed. He would go back, return his gun to the car, go back inside. Now, who listens to those laws? Only law-abiding citizens, not criminals. That's what, like, for instance, James Holmes, he had the option to go to 7 theaters. James Holmes, if you guys don't know, is the Aurora, Colorado shooting. He had the option to go to 7 theaters, all within 20 miles of his house. He happened to choose the one theater that was designated as a gun-free zone. Now, criminals will always be able to obtain guns. Let's look a couple of weeks back, September 19th in Chicago. Keep in mind, Chicago has some of the strictest gun laws in the country. A man with an AK-style weapon chambering .762 opened fire in a park, wounding 13 people. Thankfully, nobody was killed. But clearly, the Chicago assault rifle ban did not prevent this violent incident. Now, guns stopping crimes. On average, when CCW holders, which is concealed carry holders, stop a shooting, there's only an average of 2.3 deaths. When police stop shootings, there's an average of 14.3 deaths. Now, why is there such a huge difference? Well, CCW holders will be on scene. Always, they'll be there if they could stop it, and they'll have to take immediate action. A police officer, though they can be called in, their times will be fast, about 1 to 2 minutes. But how long does it take for a gunman to go through rooms? How much carnage could he do in 1 to 2 minutes? That's a lot of death that could happen. Now, CCW holders stop crimes quite often, but you never hear about them. December 11th, 2012. Now, none of you probably heard of the Clackamas Town Center shooting, the mall shooting. A shooting occurred. The suspected gunman, named Jacob Roberts, he attempted to go on a shooting spree. How many people did he kill? Only 2, and seriously wounded 1 other person. He was then confronted by a man with a CCW license and didn't even have to fire a shot. The man pointed the gun at him, and the gunman went behind the pillar, shot himself, and killed himself. Now, why is it that CCW holders are able to stop violent crime? It's because, well, to be honest with you, gunmen are cowards. They kill innocent civilians, and then when they meet the opposing force of armed cops or CCW holders, you usually hear them end up killing themselves, right? So, just to go back, why firearms will always fail to benefit society. Crime will increase if firearms are restricted. You can see that in our cities, like Chicago. And criminals will never listen to firearm restriction laws. It also leaves the law-abiding citizens with less arms than the criminals that can obtain them illegally. Because your law-abiding citizen will never break those laws And what's the point if the criminals are the ones they're trying to stop? And guns stop crimes quite often, more often than you might think. It's been shown that 1 in 10, about 10% of mass shootings are stopped by CCW holders. Thank you.
I'm gonna go print it up.
Yeah, okay.
Oh, what the? hell?
All right, Blake, you've got a very clear statement of the proposition at the beginning of the speech, but you're rushing through it, and it then sounds like you've got a second proposition that follows the first one immediately. I think that that's actually the first of your supporting points, but since there's no preview and since there's no transition language, that material runs together. You need to be a little bit more careful about moving into the body of the speech. Give us a chance to understand how the argument's going to develop. I think you need to lay out those contents for us early on. I think that was also a problem in the body of the speech because your ideas sort of run together in a few places. Now, I did think that you helped yourself a little bit at the end of the speech because your review kind of went back and reminded us what those main points were supposed to be. And if people are paying attention at that point, then they might be able to sort it out a little bit more. But it should, I think it needs to be clearer during the presentation. You explain the arguments for the most part, but sometimes the explanations are a little rushed. You really sound like you're rushing through some of the ideas, and you need to pause a little bit to explain the concept. I got some statistics that were being presented that without a context and without an explanation, they don't necessarily mean very much. This comparison about the number of people killed when there's a CCW person present versus when there isn't, that's an interesting statistic, but is that a comparison of two cases? Is that, where do those statistics come from? That sounds to me like a very odd statistic. At the end, for instance, you refer back to that statistic and say 10% of all mass shootings are stopped by somebody with a concealed weapon. And I said, okay, this is a good statistic. Where does it come from and what is it based on? That's one of the problems with the evidence. I think you've got some good examples and some good statistics, but you're not always giving us a source citation for that information, especially the statistical information which you're going to use to make your inferences. You're very dependent on the examples in a lot of cases, and I think the examples illustrate the points. See, what the examples help you do is they help you explain the concept of your argument pretty well. What you need to do is make a stronger generalization by following up on that. Gesundheit. For instance, you mentioned James Holmes, and you tell us that there were 7 other theaters in the area that he could have gone to, and he went to the one that was a no-gun zone. That's an interesting piece of information. Where did that come from? And for instance, how close were those other theaters to his location and in comparison to where he went? That might be an interesting point. I don't know if there's any other way to illustrate that he made that choice, except that it is, an interesting coincidence. Are there other cases, for instance, that back that up? That's where I think a second example would really strengthen that particular point. But again, I think you need the source citation on that information. I'm not saying that it's not true. It probably is true, but I don't know where you got that data from. So it's one of those things that just gets presented as if it is a fact, and I don't know that it's a fact. Like I said, I think that you do... The thing that explains your arguments the best are the examples that you have. I think you need to explain them a little bit more and let the examples illustrate that point more than just try and explain it for you. Let's see. Like I did say at the end, I thought that the summary did a better job of organizing your argument, and that kind of rescues some of the information and makes it a little bit easier to see how it all fits together. All right, thank you.